In the early 15th century, Western Europe was in turmoil. The Hundred Years' War with England had been raging since 1337, and although French forces had achieved some victories, England's grip on France seemed to be growing stronger by the day. But then something unexpected happened. A peasant girl from the village of Domremy came forward claiming that she had received messages from God. Not only that, but these divine whispers were telling her to lead an army to the siege of Orléans and drive back the English invaders. Although skeptical at first, the French nobility soon saw that this young woman might just be their last hope. So they placed their fate, not to mention their entire kingdom, into the hands of Joan of Arc, a 17-year-old girl who had never even held a sword before. Hello and welcome to this channel. Today we'll find out what really happened to Joan of Arc. Joan was born in the year 1412 in the small village of Domremy, which was located in what is today northeastern France. Her father, Jacques d'Arc, was a small landowner, while her mother, Isabeau, was the daughter of a local woodworker. Growing up, Joan heard stories about the French king, Charles VII, who had recently ascended to the throne after his father, Charles VI, died. Because of the ongoing war with England, Charles VII was only 5 years old when he became king and was forced to live in hiding. As a result, the country was being ruled by Queen Isabella of Bavaria, who acted as regent during her son's minority. But it wasn't just the royal family that was in hiding. In fact, Charles VII was one of the many French nobles who had been forced to flee their homes because of the advancing English army. This made life in Domremy quite dangerous, since the village was often raided by soldiers. When Joan was 10 years old, her father took her and her 3 siblings to live with relatives in the city of Vaucouleurs. She was then sent to a small school where she learned how to read, write, and do basic math. But most importantly, she learned about Catholic teachings and stories of saints, martyrs, and prophets. Around this time, Joan began hearing voices which told her to come and save the French people. At first, she didn't pay much attention to them, thinking they were just figments of her imagination. However, the voices grew louder and more insistent, eventually revealing themselves to be Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. They told her that God wanted her to take Charles VII to the city of Orléans, which was currently under siege by the English, and lift the siege. Although Joan was only 13 years old when this happened, she took her calling very seriously. That said, she also knew that she couldn't possibly go to Orléans on her own, and so she decided to keep quiet and wait until she was older. In the meantime, Joan continued to hear the voices of the saints, who kept telling her that it was her divine mission to help the French people. The voices also told her to keep a white flag with 4 golden fleurs de lis, the emblem of the French monarchy, until the time came for her to fulfill her calling. But Joan didn't have any money, so she had to make do with a red tablecloth. As Joan grew older, she worked as a servant and took care of animals. All the while, she continued to hear the voices of the saints, who never gave up on convincing her to go to Orléans. Finally, when Joan was 17, she decided to follow their advice. She went to Vaucouleurs and introduced herself to the local captain, Robert de Baudricourt, and told him about her calling. He listened patiently, but then told her that he needed more proof that she was chosen by God before he would give her any support. Disappointed but determined, Joan left and traveled to the city of Chinon, where the French royal court was staying. There she met with the men who were in charge of guarding Charles VII, including the future Louis XVIII. Again, she told them about her divine mission, but they thought she was insane and threw her in prison. However, after hearing about Joan's visions, Queen Isabella decided to meet with her personally. Joan then told the queen about the white flag, and the 2 of them went to look for it. When Isabella found the red tablecloth, she knew that Joan was telling the truth, and so she allowed her to take Charles VII out of hiding and have him crowned king in Reims, a city more than 100 miles away. As soon as the English heard that the French king had been crowned, they sent troops to capture Reims and prevent the ceremony from taking place. But Joan led an army of 10,000 French soldiers to stop them, easily defeating the numerically superior English. From there, Joan led the French to victory in several other battles, including those at Patay, Meung-sur-Loire, and Beaugency. As you can probably guess, this was extremely embarrassing for the English, who had previously dominated the battlefield. But perhaps even more surprisingly, it was also extremely awkward for Joan, since she wasn't used to wearing anything other than peasant clothes. And yet somehow she managed to look regal enough to be the savior of France. But while the French people loved her, the French nobility didn't trust her. For example, they hated the fact that she wasn't a member of the aristocracy. Another thing that bothered them was the fact that Joan claimed to be guided by God. In reality, they probably just didn't want another peasant like Joan bossing them around, and so they ordered her to return to Domremy and never set foot in a battlefield again. But Joan refused, insisting that she could not abandon her post when France still needed her. It was only after she saved the city of Orléans that they allowed her to return to the battlefield. But this didn't last long, since Joan was soon captured by the Burgundians, a group of French nobles who had allied themselves with the English. After selling her out, the Burgundians handed Joan over to the English, who imprisoned her in a tower in the city of Rouen. There she was put on trial for heresy and witchcraft, as well as charges of dressing like a man and impersonating a military leader. But it was obvious that these charges were bogus, and that the real reason the English wanted to get rid of Joan was because she had become too much of a threat. After all, as long as she was alive, the French would continue to fight back against the English. In the end, she was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to be burned at the stake. However, before this could happen, Joan's cell caught fire for unknown reasons, and she had to be moved to another tower. Later that night, the English soldiers returned with fresh charges of heresy and officially executed her by burning her at the stake on May 30th, 1431. Although Joan of Arc was only 19 years old when she died, she quickly became a legend. People started telling stories about her bravery and pointing to her execution as proof that the English were evil. This made it difficult for the English to ever fully conquer France, as the French people never stopped fighting for their country. And in 1456, Joan was finally given a proper trial and officially declared innocent. 5 years later, Pope Calixtus III canonized her as a saint. But despite the fact that she's now considered a martyr, throughout most of history, Joan has been portrayed as a strong and fierce warrior. These depictions often sexualize her, which makes sense considering that she was a young woman who didn't conform to gender roles. In fact, there's even a theory that Joan was transgender. This idea is based on the fact that she dressed like a man and fought alongside male soldiers, which was unheard of back then. However, there's no evidence that Joan was trans, and most historians agree that she simply felt comfortable fighting in male attire. Either way, Joan lived a life that most people today still couldn't handle. And it's because of this that she's remembered as one of the greatest heroes of France. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and check out our other videos about amazing women in history.